Welcome back to another episode of GTN Coach's Corner. In this episode, someone is wondering how you structure open water swim sets. Someone else is wondering why their running fitness doesn't match their cycling fitness. We've got a question about side stitches and a question about how to carry all your nutrition for an Ironman. So let's get to your questions. In GTN Coach's Corner, we answer all your triathlon related questions. Just leave them in the comment section down below. Use the hashtag GTN Coach's Corner. And next week, we could be answering your question. So let's get to this week's question, starting with this one from Gabriel Cecchiarelli. He or she says, do you structure a swim workout in open water the same as one in the pool? For example, do you do kick sets, drills, main sets, etc.? Do you change something depending on the water condition? For example, waves. Ideally, you would do a session like you do in the pool where you can hit some drills and try all different things and make sure you're hitting all the zones you need to train, etc. But it's not really practical in the open water. You can't take toys with you, you can't take a kickboard, a pool buoy. You either have it the whole time or you don't have it at all, and often you're dealing with conditions and sighting and all that kind of thing, so it's not really practical. What we would say is that you also don't want to just jump in and swim straight for however long you're going to be in there for, because that's also not very practical. So what you need to do is break it down. You can do intervals and sessions, but do them as like, say, 10 200s and pick two buoys that are 200 meters apart and go backwards and forwards between them, or do it almost as fartlek, where you kind of play with the speed. You go faster for a little while and then slow down for a bit and relax and breathe and catch your breath, and then faster again until the next turn or the next buoy, and really play with that speed and use different zones. But doing a full session like you do in the pool is not really practical. But you should break it up, and you shouldn't be afraid of pausing, stopping, and just treading water for a bit, taking a break, catching your breath. The main reason for this, much like in the pool, you take those breaks so that you can maintain a good form. If you don't take those breaks, your form starts falling apart, your stroke starts falling apart, and essentially you start ingraining a poor stroke. So if you just hop in and do open water swimming for an hour without stopping, for the last 20 minutes of that hour, you're probably just ingraining really bad stroke technique. So it's better to take a break every now and then, catch your breath, get fresh again, and then start again with a good stroke technique. As for the conditions, you kind of want to just get used to them. So you don't want to change too much based on the conditions. You want to get used to swimming hard in conditions. You want to get used to waves coming from your left, waves coming from your right, sighting in different conditions. So try and keep it as specific as possible. Try and get those efforts in, even in poor conditions. That's what an open water swim is really about, testing you for race day. The more specific you can get it to race day as far as zones and simulating race day, the better, because the open water swim is pretty much the only time you can simulate what you're going to do on race day. Next question is from Kostov. He says, I've been cycling for the past 2 years and now can hold 3 watts per kg with easy efforts for hours, but I find it hard to run even 10 kilometers, let alone a marathon. I've taken up running just a few months ago, and despite using low heart rate training, I just can't find the speed or the distance when it comes to running. What can I do to improve my running? Well, you've only taken running up a few months ago, and it takes time, so give it some time. You can't expect your body to suddenly do it. I think what Kostov is lamenting here is that his pretty good cycle fitness is not translating to good running fitness, and I'm afraid that's just the reality. Although they use mostly the same muscles, your quads, your calves, your hamstrings, they use them in very different ways, and there isn't a lot of transfer. Yes, there's a transfer of aerobic fitness, so if you're aerobically fit on the bike, you will be able to run for longer, but muscularly, they don't really transfer very well. There isn't a good transfer of fitness and form. So just because you're really strong on the bike doesn't mean you're going to be equally strong on the run. You need to get your muscles used to the run-specific strains, which is the eccentric loading and the power phase and the stance phase, and obviously the weight bearing of running, which you don't have in cycling. So it doesn't translate, unfortunately. That's just the way it is. As for wanting your speed and your distance to improve, running takes time. It's a patience game. It takes months, years even, to build to a level where you can run a marathon or where you can run fast for a 10K. You can't expect it to just happen really quickly. In fact, it's going to happen significantly slower than you might have built your cycling fitness, because it's weight bearing, because you can't just jump into really long runs and really big miles. It's going to take some time to build it up. So be patient with it. Start increasing your speed work, start doing some faster stuff. You can start with just a few short speed sessions, 1 a week or so, and then slowly build that up. Do some hills, do some strength work, and you'll see those gains starting to build. But like I say, it is weight bearing, so be careful with it and take your time. Just be patient. Okay, next question. Mark van der Haast says, hashtag GTN Coaches Corner. I've done a few sprint triathlons, and in all of them I've encountered the same problem. During the run leg, I get a pretty painful side stitch, forcing me to slow down. This actually cost me a podium finish in my last race. Even 3 days after the event, there's still some pain left. I've probably damaged some muscles. I've been really careful with fluid and food intake before the race, and I don't take anything during the race at all. It is a sprint triathlon after all, so I don't really need it. Also, during the run training, I've no problem running at the same speed and length, and I never get a stitch. Consider run to be my best discipline, and I need to make up lost time in the water. It's quite disappointing when the stitches are preventing me from putting my best effort in the run. Any tips to prevent stitches from happening during race day? Well, we actually recently made a video on this, so we'll put the link in the description down below, and you can click that and watch the whole video on what a side stitch is. It's called ETAP, not like SRAM. It's called ETAP as an exercise-induced transient abdominal pain, and it's very common in running. Almost every runner reports having one at least once a year. Everyone has stitches. What causes them is not so clear. There's various different mechanisms, and people are not really sure what the exact thing is, and because they're not sure what it is, they can't be sure how to solve it. But there are a lot of tips, many of them in that video I just mentioned, so if you are struggling with it, go ahead and watch that video. I will say that the pain for a few days afterwards, nothing to worry about. Essentially a muscle has cramped, which has caused your stitch, or what your stitch is, and any muscle that cramps is going to hurt for a few days afterwards. It's just worked way harder than it should have. It's not necessarily muscle damage. It is going to take a little while to recover. Don't worry about that pain. As far as tips and tricks I can give you right now, warm up well. Make sure you warmed up. Also, stretch, so arms above the head, twisting your body. Make sure your core is loose. As far as the core goes, one good thing that does often work is actually core strength to stabilize your whole core. So doing some core work in the weeks and months leading up to your triathlon to make your core really strong. That does help prevent stitches. Avoid eating and drinking too much, especially immediately before the race. And it sounds like you're already doing this. But one of the things you may notice, you may be doing and you may not have thought of, is actually taking water in during the swim inadvertently, not wanting to, but you may be getting some water in your mouth. As far as that goes, practice sighting, practice your breathing. Make sure you are breathing out under the water the whole time, so trickling your breath out so that water is not coming in and you're not taking a little sip of water every time you open your mouth to breathe. That should be spat out before you start that breath. So make sure you're doing that and you're not taking in water, because even a tiny sip with every stroke is going to add to a lot of water in your gut when you start running later on, and that is definitely going to help cause a stitch. So try all those things, and remember, watch that video, because hopefully that'll help you. Jamie Furman asks, what's the most efficient way to refill hydration supplies during an Ironman? Do you recommend stopping at the special needs bag or rely on aid stations after depleting what you started with? Any tips for refilling water bottles on the fly? This is a tricky one, and everyone who's done an Ironman can sympathize. You literally can't carry everything you need from the start of the bike leg, because the bike leg is simply too long. Therefore, you do have to rely on what's on the aid stations. As far as refilling, don't refill bottles. Don't attempt to refill bottles. Don't even plan to refill bottles. If you're worried about throwing away your own bottles, buy some cheap bottles from the bike shop in the days leading up to a race, ones that you don't mind discarding. Maybe even go to the expo and get some from the nutrition stand. They'll almost certainly have them there. Just get some cheap ones that you don't mind discarding. You can swap them for whatever bottles they are handing out at the aid stations. Don't try and refill your bottles. That is definitely a waste of time. If you do have a hydration system on your bike, they should have some mechanism for refilling it. Generally, all it will require is grabbing a bottle from the aid station and squirting it into a cap or a hole, a vent in that hydration system, so you can fill it up on the fly. That is obviously ideal. As far as what you carry and how much you carry, ideally you can just rely on what's at the aid stations. That means grabbing water if you want water, or almost all races will have energy drinks and electrolyte drinks at the aid stations. One of the things people do find is that they don't like what's on offer at the aid stations. They happily take the water, but they don't like the energy drink, or they don't like the flavor, or they don't like the salt content in it, or whatever it might be. If that is the case, try and make yourself as self-sufficient as possible. That means carrying separating your nutrition from your hydration. So you can grab water at the aid stations, but you've got enough gels and salts for your nutrition needs in your pockets or on your bike in your bento box, as it may be. And then you can just grab water bottles, swap them for your water cage or refill your hydration thing, your solution with water, rather than relying on the energy drinks that are at the aid stations. You don't want to be stopping, refilling, mixing, etc. You want to make sure that you're still moving as much as possible. Time spent stopped at aid stations. I'm not saying don't stop at aid stations. If you need to stop to safely swap your bottles, change one bottle for another, then you absolutely should do that, especially in an Ironman. Basically, have a nutrition plan and build in what's at the aid stations and how you're going to replace both the fluids and the energy throughout the race day. I hope that helps. It is a bit of a tricky one, so yeah, you have to plan it ahead. Read through that race booklet and make sure you know what's on the course and where the aid stations are and what they have at them. All the races publish this before race day. And that's it for our questions today. We hope some of them have helped you if you have a similar question. If you have a completely different question and we haven't answered it, leave it in the comment section down below, #GTN Coaches Corner, and we could be answering it in our next episode. Thanks for watching.